flowers were already wilting when the guard reached for his handcuffs. 9:41 at night. October air, gold and warm. A gate lit like a stage, and a man in a gray tank top standing perfectly still while 3 uniforms circled him, and a woman in a cream jacket pointed at his chest and said the words that would be recorded by 30,000 strangers before the hour was out. "Back, sir. You don't live here." He didn't argue, didn't reach for a wallet, didn't raise his voice. He looked down at the gardenias in his hand. Petals, curling at the edges, bought from the same shop on Clement Avenue he'd used every year for 3 years. Somewhere across the street, a teenager lifted his phone. Somewhere behind the iron gate, a lamp was already on, waiting. And the truth, the way his mother used to say it, was already beginning to do its work. He just had to keep standing there. He had been standing at his own gate for 11 minutes. The flowers in his hand were wilting, and the woman blocking his door still hadn't asked his name. Marcus Webb noticed the petals first. White gardenias, curling at the edges as the way gardenias do when they've been held too long in a warm hand. Them from the same shop on Clement Avenue he'd used every year for 3 years. Same florist, same flower. Same walk home through the same 6 blocks because the walk was where Diane used to live, in the quiet of it. Particular where the October air sat just above the skin and didn't ask anything of you. Tonight was 3 years. 3 years since Diane Webb had been alive and was not anymore. 3 years of mornings with a different shape, of coming home to a lamp he left on because darkness in a doorway was the one thing he'd never learned to absorb. 3 years of this exact walk on this exact evening, gardenias in hand, heading for the hall table where her photograph waited. Almost home, almost. Prescott Drive was the kind of street that looked like a Christmas card 12 months a year. Wide sidewalks, oak trees that had been old before anyone living here was born, every lawn tended, every porch light time. Marcus had lived here since 1991, 33 years of knowing every crack in the sidewalk, every oak that dropped its acorns earliest, every house that ran its sprinklers past 9. He knew this street the way you know a person you have loved a long time. He thought it knew him back. He was reconsidering that now. Gloria Ashworth was standing in front of his gate, not beside it, not near it. In front of it the way you stand in front of something when you've already decided. Arms crossed, heels planted. Hair that had been professionally attended to recently, cream jacket fitted, posture carrying the particular authority of a woman who chaired committees, expected people to know that before she introduced herself. She'd been on her phone when Marcus turned the corner. She'd seen him coming, and she hadn't moved. Marcus slowed his pace. Just slightly, taking her in. She was new to the street. He knew that without knowing her name. Number 22 had turned over 6 months ago. He'd seen the moving truck, hadn't met the new owners yet. He kept walking. He got close enough to say good evening. Close enough to reach past her and punch his code into the keypad. She stepped in front of the keypad. Not to the side, not by accident, directly in front of it. The way you step in front of something when you've run the trial in your own head and announced the verdict to yourself before the defendant arrived. Marcus stopped. "Can I help you?" Her chin came up. Barely, but it came up. "This is a private residence," Marcus said. "It is. I'm going to need you to step back from the gate." 1 beat of silence. Just 1. She wasn't asking if he was lost, wasn't asking if he needed directions, wasn't asking anything that began with any genuine curiosity about who he was or what he was doing on this particular sidewalk on this particular night. Marcus said, patient as stone. "I live here." That was when the 3 of them appeared, from around the side of the property. Moving like men who had been waiting because they had been. Uniforms, badges, the specific swagger of men who have been told they have authority over a situation and have decided to enjoy the assignment. First, big across the shoulder, jaw like it had been built with a straight edge, the kind of man who had learned early that he could fill a doorway and had been doing it professionally ever since. Pruitt beside him, shorter, making up for the inches with the expression on his face. And then hanging back half a step, the third one. Olin, younger than the other 2, maybe 40, maybe just under. He had the look of a man who was still in the process of deciding what kind of person he was going to be. Still working it out, still somewhere in the middle of that. He was looking at Marcus the way you look at someone you think you might know but can't quite place. With suspicion, with something else, something quieter. "Sir," Garrett stepped forward, "you need to back away from the gate." Marcus turned to look at him, fully, without hurry. "I live here. Sir, my name is Marcus Webb. This is my property. I've lived here since 1991. He said it the way you say something that is simply plainly true. No performance in it, no heat, just the fact, standing in its own clothes, not apologizing. The gate will verify that. He reached for the keypad. Gloria stepped closer. Don't let him touch that. The gate system activated anyway. Motion triggered, running its quiet scan. A small red light tracing the air in front of the panel. The camera above rotating with a low mechanical sound that Marcus had stopped hearing years ago. The way you stop hearing things that have always been there. Green light, owner profile recognized. Gloria made a sound in the back of her throat. Systems malfunction. That proves nothing. Anyone could have set that up. Marcus let the word "sis" in the air. Anyone's in. As in, any explanation, regardless of how unlikely, was more acceptable than the one standing directly in front of her. The obvious answer was the one that required the most resistance. He had seen this before, not here. At this gate, but he had seen it. At 23, in the lobby of an apartment building where the landlord handed the keys to the man behind him in line, the man who'd arrived 40 minutes later and hadn't filled out a single form. 30. In a parking garage, when an attendant pointed him toward the service entrance before Marcus had said a word. 47. In a boardroom where 3 men in expensive suits discussed his company's acquisition potential for 11 minutes before anyone thought to ask Marcus himself a question. Rooms, same furniture, he breathed. Garrett, he said. The guard looked up sharply, surprised by his name. I'm going to reach into my jacket pocket. Slowly, I'm going to show you my business card. It has as a number on it. You can call that number right now from your phone and speak to my assistant. She will pull up the deed of sale, the property tax records, the HOA registration, and the 2019 Forbes profile if you'd like something to read while you wait. Garrett stared at him. Or, Marcus said, you can look at the screen behind you, and you can decide what kind of man you want to be when this is over. Nobody moved. The October night held everything in place. The gate lights, the oak trees, the wilting flowers, and Marcus Webb, standing at the threshold of everything he had built, waiting, one more time, for the world to catch up to what the gate already knew. A door opened. Eleanor Voss stepped onto her porch, and the porch light caught her. Small, 72 years old, gray cardigan pulled around her shoulders. The look on her face was not surprise. Opposite of surprise. The face of a woman who has lived long enough to recognize a scene from its opening seconds because she has watched at it before, and before that, and before that. She did not come down her steps, not yet. She stood on her porch and she watched. She did not say anything because she was Eleanor Voss, and she had learned over a very long life that timing was everything. The word said too early gets argued with. That the word said at the right moment lands somewhere it can't be dislodged from. The 2 houses down, a flash of light, phone screen rising. Darius, 16 years old, Eleanor's grandnephew, visiting for the week. Come outside to roll the trash bin to the curb. Found something considerably more significant. He stood at the edge of Eleanor's driveway now, phone up, heart going at twice its normal speed because he was 16 and he could feel the way you feel things in your chest before your brain has the vocabulary for them, that the geometry of what was happening across the street was wrong. Y'all, he said into the camera, barely above a whisper. Y'all, I need you to see this. The number in the corner of his screen started moving. 200, 400, 900, past 1,000 before he'd said another word. He held the phone steady, let the gate and the lights and the man with the flowers do the rest. Garrett was not backing down. You could watch it happen in real time. The recalibration, the doubling, the specific stubbornness of a man who has committed authority to a position and is now defending the commitment rather than examining whether the position was ever sound. We're going to need verifiable ID, he said. Something physical. The gate verified me, Marcus said. The gate is a system. Systems can be manipulated. By whom? By anyone who wants access to a property, including the owner. Garrett's jaw tightened. Sir, I need you to produce physical identification or step away from the gate while we contact the property management company. 9:41 at night. We'll leave a message. The property management company, Marcus said, is me. I founded it in 2001. The registered agent is my attorney. His number is on file with the county. You can look it up. Pruitt looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at Pruitt. Now what? Said the look between them. Gloria filled the silence before it could settle into something uncomfortable. He's stalling, she said. People do that. They create confusion and then slip through while you're dealing with it. She turned to Garrett, her voice dropping into something that was meant to be decisive. Want him detained. We have every right. What right? The voice came from across the street, calm, unhurried, carrying. Eleanor had come down her steps. She crossed Prescott Drive slowly, the hip that talked to her in cold weather, making its opinion known. She stopped on Marcus's side of the street, at the edge of the sidewalk, and she looked at Gloria the way she looked at things she had seen before and had run out of patience for. "What right do you have," Eleanor said, "to stand in front of another person's home and demand they prove themselves to you? I'm protecting this neighborhood. You've lived in this neighborhood for the 6 months." Eleanor's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. "Marcus Webb has lived here for 33 years. I have lived here for 15. I know who belongs on this street." Gloria's chin came up. "That's not the point. It is exactly the point." Garrett stepped slightly forward, inserting himself. "This is a security matter. We'd ask you to step back." Eleanor looked at him the way a 72-year-old woman looks at a man young enough to be her son's who has just said something she finds deeply unimpressive. "Not step back." The gate screen lit up again. Full panel this time. Text scrolling in clean green lines. Profile Marcus A. Webb. Property registered 1991. Access unrestricted. Biometric confirmation complete. Across the street, Darius made a sound. 12,000, he breathed into his camera. "Y'all, 12,000 people are watching this right now." The comments were already a river. Moving faster than he could read, he stopped trying to read them and focused on holding the phone steady, on not dropping it, on being, in whatever way a 16-year-old boy with a phone could be, a witness. Gloria looked at the screen. "Away from it. Custom installation," she said. "I want physical ID and I want it now." Marcus looked at her. He took in the set of her jaw, the slight tremor at the edge of her left hand she was trying to hide, the posture of someone absolutely certain she was right, and starting, molecule by molecule, to feel the first tremor of doubt beneath that certainty. She wasn't just certain she was right. She was certain she needed to be right. Those were different conditions, and the second one was what was driving the escalation. "Ma'am," Marcus said, "what's your name?" She blinked. The question had not been in the script she'd been running. "Gloria Ashworth. Number 22. I moved in 6 months ago. Then you've lived on street for 6 months," Marcus said. "I've lived on it for 33 years. My name is on the deed. My name is on the gate. My tax records are filed with the county. My photograph is on the HOA registration." He paused, one beat. "This morning there was a break-in 2 streets over. I saw the police presence on Clement came through. You heard about it. You came out here. You saw me walking. You made a decision before I reached the gate." Gloria's jaw tightened. "I was being cautious." "You were being certain," Marcus said. "Those aren't the same thing. Cautious asks questions. Certain has already answered them." Raise his voice. He never raised his voice, but the words went somewhere. He could see it in the faces of the people who had gathered on the sidewalk without anyone calling a meeting. 7 people now, maybe 8. The couple from number 30 with their dog, a man in a brown jacket Marcus recognized from weekend mornings at the park. A woman who walked the street every evening with headphones in. Tonight the headphones were around her neck and she was watching. All of them watching, and Darius still lived, the number past 15,000 and rising. He pressed it down the way he had learned to. Below the waterline, below the place where it became visible. But the memory came anyway, because memories don't ask permission. They arrive when the conditions are right, when something in the present moment matches the frequency of something you've carried so long you've stopped knowing you're carrying it. 19 years old, standing in a kitchen that smelled like pine sol and his mother's tiredness. Ruth Webb had worked for the Calloway family for 11 years. 11 years of early mornings and late buses, and yes, moms delivered with grace and no sirs that cost her more than she ever said aloud. Once in 11 years had she taken so much as a breath mint from that house that wasn't offered freely. Glass of water without asking, not a minute of rest without being certain the work was done. That October, a watch went missing. A man's gold watch, belonged to Mr. Calloway, went missing on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning the conclusion had already been drawn. No one said Ruth's name. They didn't have to. They said we have to consider everyone who has access to the house and looked at the one person in the room whose presence did depend being trusted and who had just had that trust withdrawn before she'd been told. Ruth Webb collected her things in a paper grocery bag. She walked out. On the bus home, she sat next to Marcus, who was holding her hand and shaking, and she looked out the window at Birmingham, going past in the gray October light. She was quiet a long time, long enough that Marcus thought maybe she wasn't going to say anything, that maybe this was one of those times when there was nothing to say, and she knew that, and he should learn to know it too. She spoke, not loudly, not for anyone else, just for him, in the voice she used for the things she needed to say. Don't argue with people who've already decided who you are, baby. Just know who you are as yourself. The truth does its own work. Always has. You just have to give it room. 3 weeks later, the watch turned up under the cushion of Mr. Calloway's favorite armchair, where he himself had set it down on a Sunday afternoon and forgotten. Nobody called Ruth Webb. Nobody said a word. Marcus had waited at 19 for someone to say something, had waited the way you wait when you still believe that the correction will come. Someone in that house would pick up a telephone and say they were wrong, and it would mean something. The call never came, and somewhere in that waiting, something in Marcus Webb had quietly, permanently shifted, not into bitterness. His mother had not raised him toward bitterness, had been almost strategic about closing that particular door, but into something else. Into the clear-eyed understanding that the correction, when it came, would come from him, from his presence, from his work. From the sheer, irrefutable accumulation of a life lived in full, he came back to the present, back to the gate. Lights. The woman in the cream jacket who had made a decision before he reached the sidewalk. The gardenias in his hand were past wilting now. Petals had gone almost translucent at the edges, thin as paper, still holding their shape, but barely. He looked at them. He thought of Diane, of the photograph on the hall table on the other side of this gate, of the lamp he'd left on. Thought of how long he'd been standing here. I'm sorry, he thought. Not to anyone in front of him. To Gloria or Garrett or the growing audience on Darius's phone. To the flowers. To the woman they were for. I'm sorry I'm late, Diane. I got held up at the door. Then Marcus Webb raised his head and continued to stand, with patience that had been built over decades out of materials most people never have to gather, on the sidewalk in front of his own home. Waiting for the truth to do its work. Olin had not moved from his position. He was still in the slice-back placement he'd occupied since the beginning, by Garrett and Pruitt, close enough to be part of the arrangement but not driving it. Watching. The face of a man working through something private while everything around him moved at a different speed. He was looking at the flowers. Been looking at them, on and off, since Marcus first turned the corner. Not at Marcus's face, not at the gate. The gardenias, specifically, the particular variety of white gardenia that only one shop in the area carried, sourced from a grower 2 counties over, the stems slightly longer than average, the scent that reached you a moment after you noticed them. Last seen flowers like that at Gracewood Memorial Cemetery, Section C, 3rd row, every spring, every autumn, sometimes in the early winter when the frost hadn't committed yet. A man arriving through the east entrance, always alone, always unhurried. Olin had learned the car first, then realized one evening, watching from across the grass, that the man sometimes walked. Same deliberate pace, same straight back, same 20 minutes at the grave, same way of standing at it, not collapsed over it. Performing grief for anyone, just present with it. The way you're present with something when you've learned that presence is all you have left to offer. Olin had never introduced himself. It hadn't been his place. Cemetery work had its protocols, most of them unspoken, and interrupting a man at a grave was not something you did unless you were specifically invited. He had moved on from Gracewood Memorial 11 months ago, joined the private security firm. This contract on Prescott Drive was 3 months old. Not expected this. He had not expected on a Wednesday evening in October to be standing at a gate in a uniform with a badge on his chest, on the wrong side of something, looking at the man from Section C, 3rd row. Garrett's voice cut through. Olin. Not a question, a reminder. Olin didn't respond. He was doing the math in his head, the timeline of it, and the math was landing in a way that made the badge on his chest feel considerably heavier than it had at the start of the shift. Marcus noticed. He had been noticing Olin since the beginning, in the way you notice the one person in a group who is still thinking. Garrett was performing, Pruitt was following, but Olin was present in a different way. Processing. Somewhere behind his eyes, something was moving. Darius caught it too, without knowing exactly what he was seeing. He angled the camera slightly, finding Olin's face in the frame, holding it. Something in the younger guard's expression, the specific quality of someone standing at a decision, came through the screen and reached 19,000 people watching from everywhere. Then Gloria, who had been regrouping, made the call that changed the shape of the evening. 2 sentences. Low enough, thus Mars caught the rhythm, but not the words. Put the phone away, and when she came back to herself, back to the sidewalk, back to the gate, there was something different in her posture. Confirmation-shaped energy of someone who has received backup from somewhere. She straightened. The Homeowners Association has a formal verification protocol, she said. We can resolve this through proper channels tomorrow morning during business hours. Until then, you're going to need to make other arrangements for tonight." Crowd stirred. From the back, the man in the brown jacket said, low but clearly, "Other arrangements," in front of his own house. Someone else. The system already said his name. A third voice. A woman Marcus didn't know. He's been standing there for 45 minutes. Gloria turned toward the voices. "This is a private matter between the homeowners association." "He is a homeowner," Eleanor said. Still at Marcus's side, still entirely unmovable. That's the point everyone here seems to be working very hard to avoid. Marcus looked at Eleanor. She looked back at him. In that look, in the brief, wordless exchange of it, was something that needed no translation. The look of both two people who have been on this street long and looked what this street has cost them, who have stood in different versions of this moment in different configurations across a shared lifetime and are standing in another one now and are still here. Still here, that was the whole answer. Marcus turned back to the gate. He placed his hand flat on the panel beside the keypad. The system responded instantly, not with just the green light this time, the full screen illuminated. Document feed. Deeds of sale dated April 1991. Name on the title, Marcus A. Webb. Tax record, HOA registration. And then the gates owns a camera feed, showing the crowd from inside, so showing the guards from the property's perspective, showing exactly what the house saw when it looked at this street tonight. Marcus said, his phone to his ear, his voice unhurried. Log tonight's incident. Full footage, all cameras, time-stamped from arrival. Her voice came back immediately. Calm, precise, already running, and pull the Forbes Archive 2019 issue, sending to the gate display now. The gate screen shifted. Documents gave way to a cover image. The 2019 Forbes issue. Marcus Webb's ep in the suit he had worn exactly once for exactly this photograph, looking at the camera with the expression of a man who found the whole enterprise slightly amusing but had agreed to it in good faith. Carter Webb Holdings CEO expands global portfolio. The headline clean and unambiguous across the top. 22,000 people on Darius's screen. Darius had stopped whispering. He'd figured out by now that the less he said, the more people leaned in. He just held the camera. The gate and the screen, the man with the wilting gardenias carry the weight of the story. Garrett stared at the Forbes cover, at Marcus, then at the cover again. Pruitt said nothing, but something moved behind his eyes. The arrival of information that had been available for a long time connecting, finally, with something he could longer redirect. Gloria looked at the screen. She looked at it the way you look at something, when you are aware that you are being seen looking at it, aware that 22,000 people are watching trophies as you process the thing in front of you, aware that the argument that you walked out here with tonight is somewhere beneath the sidewalk now, and you don't entirely know how it got there. She looked the screen. She looked at Marcus. She opened her mouth, and then she looked at the flowers. She stopped. Gardenias, what remained of them, white petals folding inward, the specific variety of gardenia that her husband, Robert, had brought to the church on their wedding day 31 years ago. He'd driven to 3 different florists to find them, had called ahead from a payphone because cell phones were a novelty, and he hadn't trusted one with something this important. He'd stood at the altar with them in his hands, and said later that he'd wanted something that smelled like a promise you intended to keep. She had not thought about that in a very long time. She looked at the flowers in Marcus Webb's hand on a street he had lived on for 33 years, on the 3-year anniversary of something she had not known and had not asked about and had not considered. And she said, without deciding to, without meaning to make it part of the conversation, "Who are those for?" Question came out small, almost involuntary, the question of someone who has found an unexpected door and all she thought was solid. Marcus looked at her, for the first time all evening, the full attention of it, not past her or through her, or at some neutral point over her shoulder. At her, "My wife," he said. "Today is 3 years. The sidewalk went quiet, not the charged, contested silence of a standoff. Different kind. The kind that falls when something private has been said out loud in a public place and the air doesn't know immediately how to hold it. 22,000 people in apartments and living rooms and kitchens and cars across 12 time zones stopped scrolling, stopped commenting, just watched. Gloria Ashworth stood in her cream jacket in front of a gate she could not open because she did not own what was behind it. For the first time tonight, the first genuine, felt in the body time, she understood what she was standing in the middle of. Not a security situation. A man trying to come home to his dead wife's photograph with flowers that were now beyond saving. On the anniversary, on this street that was his, she stood in that understanding. She didn't move yet. Something had changed in the architecture of the night, in the quality of the air around the gate, in the way Eleanor Voss was watching, and the way Olin was watching, and the way Darius's camera was watching, and the way 22,000 people were watching. The truth Ruth Webb had once told a 19-year-old boy on a Birmingham bus does its own work. It was doing it now. You could see it happening, in real time, in front of everyone. Nobody left. That was the thing nobody planned for. When people gather on a sidewalk over something that isn't their business, the assumption is they'll drift, checks their phones. Remember, they have somewhere to be. The couple with the dog would walk on. The man in the brown jacket would head back inside. The woman with the headphones would put them back in. Nobody left. The couple with the dog had stopped walking altogether. The woman held the leash in both hands now, the dog sitting at her feet, and she was watching the gate the way you watch something when you've understood that you are in the presence of something real, and leaving would be a kind of failure. The man in the brown jacket had moved closer to the sidewalk, closer to the gate, closer to whatever this was becoming. Woman with the headphones had her phone out now too, not live streaming, just recording, the way you record things you want to be able to look at later and confirm that you actually saw them. Darius was still there, phone up, arm aching, 26,000 people in the corner of his screen, the number ticking upward in small, steady increments the way a tide comes in, not dramatically, not in a rush, just consistently, inevitably, until you look down and realize the water is somewhere it wasn't before. He hadn't said much in the last several minutes, had figured out, somewhere in the middle of all of this, that his voice was not the point. Street was the point. The gate was the point. The man standing in front of it with the flowers carried for 45 minutes on the anniversary of the worst day of his life was the point. Darius kept the phone steady and let the point make itself. Marcus had not moved from where he stood. This was the thing that was starting to do something to the crowd. Not his arguments, not the gate system, not the Forbes cover still visible on the display panel. His stillness, the quality of it. Specific kind of stillness that isn't passivity or defeat, but something else entirely. The stillness of a man who knows exactly where he is, exactly who he is, and is not remotely confused by anyone else's confusion about either of those facts. Garrett was losing the thread. You could see it in the jaw, the weight shifting from foot to foot, the eyes that kept going to the gate screen and then away from it, as if the screen were saying something he didn't want to hear, and he was trying to stop listening. Desperate men make the worst decisions. They reach for the nearest solid thing, and sometimes the nearest solid thing is another mistake. Okay. Opportunity, Garrett said. His voice had gone to a register that was meant to sound final. Produce government-issued identification or step away from this gate. Those are the options. Marcus looked at him. Call the police, Marcus said. Garrett blinked. Call them, Marcus said again. Evenly, like a man offering directions. Call them right now. When they arrive, the gate will show them what it has already shown you. Darius over there will show them what he's been filming for the last 45 minutes. We'll all have a longer evening than anyone planned. Paused. Or you can look at the screen behind you one more time and decide. Garrett did not turn around. Pruitt did. Pruitt turned and looked at the gate panel, which was still running its document display. Clean scans. Official headers, the name Marcus A. Webb appearing in 7 different places across 3 different documents, and Pruitt stood there looking at it long enough that the calculation happening behind his face became visible to everyone watching. Put his hand on Garrett's arm. Garrett, don't! Man low, just for the two of them, except the street was quiet enough and Darius's phone was close enough that 26,000 people heard it anyway. I think we need to. I said don't. Pruitt's hand stayed on Garrett's arm for one more second. Dropped. He took a half step back, not away from the situation, but back from Garrett specifically, creating a small, visible distance between himself and the man he'd been standing beside all evening. Wasn't much, but 26,000 people saw it, and Eleanor Voss saw it, and filed it, and did not comment on it yet. Eleanor had been on her feet for 45 minutes. The hip was making a formal complaint now, not the casual commentary of earlier. This was a grievance, filed with full documentation, demanding acknowledgement. She gave it none. She had been ignoring more important things than joint pain for 7 decades, and she was not about to renegotiate the terms tonight. She stood at Marcus's side, and she watched the street the way she'd watched it for 15 years. From this angle, from this exact position, she had seen a great many things on Prescott Drive. She had seen Harold Breck at number 28 spend 11 years becoming a different person than the one he'd been when he moved in. She had seen the Millers at 30 get divorced and then inexplicably move back in together 3 years later, and she had learned not to ask. She had seen Marcus Webb come home to a lit window for 20 years, and then come home to a window he lit himself for 3, and she had understood the difference without needing anyone to explain it. She had seen this street be generous, and she had seen it be small. Tonight it was being watched by 30,000 people on a teenager's phone, and Eleanor DeVos was choosing to believe that meant something. Darius appeared beside her. He'd crossed the street without taking his eyes off the screen, navigating by peripheral vision and luck, and now he was standing next to his great-aunt with the phone still up and the camera still running and his arm genuinely trembling from the effort of holding it steady. "Aunt Eleanor," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the gate. 30,000 I can count, Eleanor said. I mean, 30,000 people are watching this happen right now. I know what you mean. A pause. Going to happen. Eleanor looked at the gate, at Marcus standing in front of it, still unhurried, the flowers in his hand past the point of saving. At Gloria Ashworth standing to the side, something having shifted in her posture since she'd asked about the flowers, something not quite resolved but no longer certain. Something's already happening, Eleanor said. Pay attention. Darius paid attention. He had been paying attention since he'd come outside to take out the trash and found this instead. Thought he would be paying attention to this night for a very long time. If that, he might be one of those people who 30 years from now found themselves telling this story at a dinner table, trying to describe the particular quality of the air on Prescott Drive at 10:30 on a Wednesday night in October. He wasn't sure he'd have the words for it then either, but he'd try. He kept the camera steady. Olin had known for 20 minutes. He'd known in the way you know things that you're not ready to act on yet. The knowing, sitting in the chest like a stone, solid and clear, while everything around it continued its motion. That math had finished itself somewhere around the time Gloria had asked about the flowers, and Marcus had answered her. The knowing had nowhere to go but forward. He looked at his badge, the badge that said he was here in an official capacity. Said he had authority over this gate and this sidewalk and the situation. The badge that had been, for the last 45 minutes, on the wrong side for every single thing it was supposed to represent. Thought about Theo, his son, 26 years old, living on the north side of the city, working in child welfare. Sitting across kitchen tables from families the system had decided to look at with suspicion first and curiosity never. Coming home tired in the way that work costs you when you're doing it honestly. When you care about the outcome in a way you can't switch off at the end of the shift. Theo had been 8 years old when it happened. When Olin had been arrested, when the case had dragged through 18 months of continuances and legal motions and crushing fees they didn't have and couldn't get because they didn't have the kind of history that banks found reassuring. With no explanation he ever fully understood, the fees had been covered, a foundation, anonymous, full representation, a good lawyer, genuinely good, not just willing, who had taken the case and dismantled it in 6 weeks and walked Olin out of a courtroom on a Tuesday morning in March with his hands free. Tried for 2 years to find out who had funded it. The foundation's administrators were politely, absolutely immovable. Donor had specified anonymity. Olin had eventually slowly stopped looking, but he had never stopped wondering. And standing here on the sidewalk saw Marcus Webb. At the where Marcus stood, at the flowers he'd carried across 6 blocks on the anniversary of his wife's death. At the patience that had not cracked once in 45 minutes of being treated like an intruder in his own life. Olin understood that some things you know without needing to be told. Some things you know in your chest, where the stone has been sitting. He reached up, unclipped his badge from his chest. Held it in his palm for a moment, feeling the weight of it, everything it had meant when he had put it on this morning and everything it meant right now. Down on the low stone wall beside the gate, metal on stone, a small sound, precise and clear in the quiet of the street. Turned. What are you doing? Not a question, a warning. Stepping back, Olin said. You step back now, you're done. That? Yes, your contract, your reference, everything. I understand, Olin said. He was looking at Marcus, not at Garrett. I understand what I'm giving up. I also understand what I'm not giving up. He turned to face the people gathered on the sidewalk. The couple with the dog, the man in the brown jacket, the woman with the headphones, Darius with the phone. Eleanor with her hip and her patience and her 15 years on this street. And, beyond all of them, somewhere behind the glowing screen of a phone held by a 16-year-old boy, 30,000 people he would never meet who were watching a sidewalk in October. Clear his throat. He didn't preface it. He just started talking. I used to work at Gracewood Memorial Cemetery, he said. Security and groundskeeping, 5 years. East Side location, Section C, 3rd row. The street was very quiet. There was a man who came regularly. Same flowers every time, same section. He'd stay about 20 minutes, never made noise. Just stood there with the flowers, the way you stand somewhere when you're not ready to leave, but you know you have to. He paused. I never introduced myself, wasn't my place, but I knew his face, I knew his walk, and I knew the kind of grief that looks like that, the quiet kind, the kind that's learned to carry itself inside a regular life without making the whole life about it. He looked at Marcus directly. I recognized him the moment he walked up to this gate tonight. Garrett made a sound. Olin kept going. 18 years ago, I was arrested for something I didn't do. Wrong place, wrong description, wrong outcome. Couldn't afford proper representation. I was facing 3 years minimum. He breathed. Once, slow. Someone paid my legal fees. Full representation. The case was dismissed in 6th week. The money came through an anonymous foundation. I spent 2 years trying to find out who was behind it. Eventually stopped looking. He looked at Marcus. Just at Marcus. But I never stopped wondering. Marcus said nothing, which was in the specific grammar of this moment, everything. Not confirmation, not denial. The look of a man who had made a decision a long time ago to do a thing without requiring an acknowledgement for it, and who was not going to undermine that decision now just because the moment was offering him the option. Said something, not loudly, not for the cameras, just for Olin, in the private language of one man recognizing another across a sidewalk at 10:30 on a Wednesday night in October. I see you, his eyes said. I have always seen you. That's the whole point. 31,000 people watched a guard take off his badge and set it on a stone wall. Darius's phone trembled slightly in his hands. He steadied it. He pressed nothing down this time. The memory came, and he let it back come, because he was tired of pressing, because he'd been pressing for 45 minutes and standing still for 45 minutes, and with being patient for 45 minutes. Ruth Webb's son was allowed, on the 3-year anniversary of the worst morning of his life, to let something surface without immediately containing it. 34 years old. Spring. The air had that particular quality of early April in this part of the country. Not warm exactly, but willing. The way April is always willing, even when it can't quite deliver. He was standing in a driveway that was technically his, but hadn't yet learned his weight. The papers were signed. The keys were in his pocket. The previous owners had moved their furniture out and left behind the invisible residue of 20 years of another family's life, the particular quality of rooms that have held a lot of living and aren't sure what to make of the change. Marcus had stood in his driveway on his first morning and breathed the air and thought, I built this, not inherited. Not borrowed, built. And then a man appeared at the property line. Harold Breck, number 28. 67 years old, white-haired, blue-eyed, the kind of blue that had been sharp once and was learning to be something else. He wore a cardigan that had been washed so many times it had become more idea than garment. He looked at Marcus the way people look at things that don't fit the pattern they've built their whole adult life around. Not with malice, exactly. The blunt confusion of someone encountering data that doesn't parse. Then he looked at the house, then back at Marcus. You sure you can afford this neighborhood, son? Marcus had stood there and let the question land, had let it land and looked at it from all its angles and considered his options, which were several. He could let Harold know with precision what those words had just done. He could turn and go inside without answering. He could locate the kind of professional smile that fit over the face like a mask and wore it until Harold left. He did none of those things. Sir, Marcus said, I don't just plan to afford it. I plan to build something here worth affording. Harold was quiet for a long time after that, long enough that Marcus had turned back to his house and decided the conversation was over. Breck, the old man said suddenly. Number 28. Marcus turned back. Marcus Webb. Another pause. Harold looking at him. Looking at the house. Looking at him again. You drink coffee? Yes, I make terrible coffee, Harold said. Consistently terrible. Every morning, 7 o'clock. He put his hands in the pockets of the cardigan. If you want to come by sometime, I won't make it any better on your account. It was the worst invitation Marcus had ever received. He took it the next morning, and the morning after that. And the morning after that, through 11 years of reliably terrible coffee, and Harold particularly with working through ideas he'd been wrong about for so long they'd calcified into assumption. Harold had been wrong about many things. He had a gift, unusual in a man his age and background, for eventually recognizing the wrongness and then working at it with genuine effort. Overnight, not dramatically, slowly, the way a tree grows, by increments that are invisible day by day and undeniable year by year. Harold died on a Tuesday in March 2014. He left two things for Marcus in an envelope delivered 3 weeks after the funeral. A letter Marcus had read once and put away because once was all a person could manage, and he'd known that going in. Worn spine, faded cover, a paperback so read it had gone soft at the corners, To Kill a Mockingbird. First page, blue ink, handwriting that had started shaking in the last year, and hadn't let that stop it from being legible. For the man who taught an old fool to see, Harold, that book was in the hall table inside the gate, between the lamp and Diane's photograph. He'd put it there after the funeral and had never moved it because it belonged near the door, near the coming and going, near the place where you crossed the threshold between what the world did to you and what you chose to do with yourself in response. Harold had been dead for 10 years. He was standing very close tonight. Marcus could feel him in the particular way you feel people who have left a permanent shape-sip in the air around you. The make a chord, Harold would have said, in that voice that had been gruff for so long it had forgotten it was covering something. Just stand still. Let them make the whole record. Marcus came back to the street. Olin was still standing with his badge on the stone wall. Sherritt was shaking his head slowly, the head shake of a man watching something he'd been responsible for come apart faster than he can track it. Pruitt was looking at his own badge now, not at anyone else's, just at the thing on his own chest, in the quiet reckoning of a man considering the weight of what he's been carrying. And Gloria. Gloria was standing slightly apart from where she'd been standing, not a dramatic shift. One step to the left. Step back. Not retreating, not yet, but no longer planted in the way she'd been planted since Marcus came around the corner. She was looking at Olin, at the badge on the wall. She was doing the math. Marcus could see it, the math about what it cost to do what Olin had just done and what that cost said about why he'd done it. The math was not landing in her favor. The woman spoke from the back of the crowd. Marcus had noticed her when she arrived. She'd come maybe 20 minutes ago. Dark coat, natural hair silvering at the temples, the posture of someone who had walked over from somewhere nearby and had come to watch rather than participate. States at the back, hadn't commented, hadn't filmed. When she spoke, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. My father stood exactly like this. The crowd turned toward her. She wasn't addressing anyone specifically, just the air. The street, just the record, spoken into whatever document an October night could be, 1987, in front of his own business. He'd owned it for 12 years. Someone called the police, said there was a suspicious man at the back door. Stopped, breathed. It was a Sunday morning. He'd forgotten his keys and was tracing the side entrance. He'd done it 100 times before. Never needed to explain himself before. The couple with the dog had stopped entirely. The man in the brown jacket had his hand pressed to his mouth. The officers came, took 40 minutes to sort out. No one was charged, no one was arrested, and no one, her voice caught for just a second, not the officers, not the person who called, not anyone on that street, said a single word of apology. Day, not ever. She looked at Marcus, directly at him. He never stood quite as straight after that day. Knowest, but I didn't have the words for it. I was 11. She looked at his posture, at the line of his back. The 45 minutes of complete, unwavering uprightness. You're still standing straight, she said. Not a compliment, quite. More like a recognition. Acknowledgement between people who understand the specific cost of remaining vertical when the world keeps suggesting you sit. Marcus looked at her. He nodded once. 35,000 people watched the nod. The air on Prescott Drive had changed in the way that air changes when something true has been said out loud that was previously only being thought. The change was chemical almost, physical. You could feel it in the throat, in the chest, in the specific way the crowd had stopped being a collection of individuals watching a thing and had become something more unified. Something with a shared direction. Gloria felt it. She was still to the side, still in her cream jacket, still not entirely sure what had happened to the ground she'd been standing on when she'd walked out here 90 minutes ago. Ground had not disappeared. She was still on it, but it felt like completely different ground now. Like she'd been walking forward in the dark and had stepped into a different room entirely without a door. She looked at the flowers one more time. White gardenias past saving, still held. Robert's voice from 31 years ago, in a church that smelled like lilies and wood polish. Something that smells like a promise you intend to keep. She did the thing nobody had predicted. She stepped aside, not dramatically, not with any announcement, not all at once. A step to the left, then another, clearing the space in front of the gate that she had been occupying since before Marcus arrived. Her arms uncrossed, her heels lifted slightly from the pavement, redistributing her weight, changing the whole architecture of her stance. She stepped aside and looked at the ground, just looked at the ground, not collapsed, not sobbing, not performing remorse for the cameras. Something quieter than that, something that was happening privately inside a public moment. The look of a woman who has picked up something she thought was a tool and realized too late that it was a wound and is standing in the first minutes of understanding what that means. The crowd didn't cheer. That was important, that nobody cheered, because it wasn't a victory, what was happening. It wasn't a defeat. It was something more complicated and more human than either of those things. A person standing in the full weight of a mistake in front of a witnesses, not running from it, not explaining it, not collapsing under it. Just standing in it. Garrett looked at Gloria, waiting. For the signal that didn't come, he looked at Pruitt. Pruitt looked at his badge. Pruitt did something small and enormous. He reached up with 2 fingers and unfastened the badge from his chest. He didn't make a speech about it, didn't announce it, didn't put it on the wall the way Olin had. He held it in his hand for a moment, then slid it quietly into his jacket pocket. Garrett shook his head. He looked at Marcus, and Marcus Webb looked back at him with the patience of a man who has been waiting for this specific moment, not because he knew it was coming, but because he had chosen 45 cents ago on a sidewalk with wilting flowers in his hand, to give the truth enough room to do its work. Marcus said. She picked up immediately. Log the full incident report. All camera feeds, timestamped, geotagged. Send to my attorney and to the management office of the security firm. Paused, and send a written record to the HOA board. Attention all members. A standard documentation. Already compiled, Nia said. Do you need anything else tonight? Marcus looked at the gate, at the green light that had been waiting for him since the moment he arrived. No, he said. I'm going home. He placed his hand on the panel. The gate opened, slow, deliberate, the iron panels parting with the sound of a mechanism that has been waiting to do exactly this for the better part of an hour, now finally, unhurriedly, performing its only actual purpose. Marcus Webb walked through his own gate. He did not rush. He did not look back at Garrett. Just inside the threshold, and turned, and the gold light of his property fell across him, and he looked at the people on the sidewalk, the crowd that had stayed, that had not left, that had watched and went tennis, in some spoken, and he said, clearly enough for everyone and the cameras, this street has good people on it. That's it for a moment. Remember that when you're deciding what kind of neighbor to be. Then he turned and walked up the path toward his front door. Benny's maple on the left, Diane's tree, planted the second spring, fussed over for 3 years until it took, was deep red-orange in the property lights. Color of something lit from inside. The door opened before he reached it, the system. Recognizing his walk, Diane had set that feature up and thought it was the funniest and most sensible thing she'd ever done and had demonstrated it to every single person who visited for a year. The house knows you, she'd told them every time, with the specific delight of someone who never got tired of a good thing. Something? It was something. Marcus Webb stepped inside, the door closed behind him. On the sidewalk, nobody moved for a long moment. The couple with the dog started walking again, slowly, not quite ready to be done with what they'd witnessed. The woman with the headphones put them back around her neck and stood another minute looking at the gate before turning for home. The woman in the dark coat who had spoken about her father turned away without looking back. But her shoulders were different when she left. Something in the set of them, something that had been held for 37 years, in the particular way you hold things when no one's asking about them, had been, if not released, then at least acknowledged. Named, said out loud on a street in October in front of witnesses. That was something. That was not nothing. Darius lowered his phone. His arm was done. Completely, genuinely done. He'd been holding it up for so long that putting it down felt like setting down something heavier than it was. At the screen, 41,000 people, still watching, even now, even after the gate had closed. He looked at Eleanor. What do I write, he said, when I post it? What do I write for the caption? Eleanor considered it. Thuk thought, the real one, the kind that reaches all the way down through everything you know before it comes back up with an answer. Right, she said. Tonight I watched a man come home. Darius looked at her. That's it? That's everything, Eleanor said. People who need to understand it will understand it the most. He looked at the gate, at the property lights, still on behind it. Path Marcus had walked up. At the Japanese maple going red-orange in the warm October dark, he typed the caption. Tonight I watched a man come home. He posted the video. 41,000 people saw it within the first minute. By morning, the number would be something else entirely. But that was morning. Right now, it was 10:47 on a Wednesday night on Prescott Drive, and Darius was standing on a sidewalk next to his great-aunt and her complaining hip, and the gate was closed, and Marcus was home, and Gloria Ashworth was walking slowly back toward number 22 with the particular gait of someone carrying something heavy that she hadn't been carrying when she left. Olin's badge was still on the stone wall. Nobody had picked it up, not yet. The hall smelled like home. Was the first thing. Always the first thing coming through this door, the specific composite of old wood and the cedar closet and whatever had been cooking last and the faint trace of the gardenia candles Diane had burned in every room for 20 years until the smell had stopped being the candles and started being the house itself. Marcus stood in the hall and let the smell arrive. He did not move immediately. He stood in the threshold of his own front door and let the house settle around him the way the house always settled around him when he came home, recognizing him, adjusting to his presence, doing whatever houses do when the person who belongs in them has finally returned. Was on. He always left the lamp on. Had left it on every evening for 3 years now, the same lamp on the same table, because coming home to darkness at doorway was the one thing he had tried once and decided he would not try again. The photograph was there, Diane, laughing at something off camera, the full-face laugh she'd had, nothing contained, nothing held back, the laugh of someone who had made a fundamental decision about how to move through the world and had committed to it so thoroughly that by the time Marcus met her, it had become simply who she was. Fallen in love, initially, with the laugh, had loved the woman behind it for 34 years, had been loving her still, in the way you love people who have restructured the interior of you, for 3 years after she was gone. Beside the photograph, the book, To Kill a Mockingbird, Harold's handwriting on the first page. 10 years on this table, and Marcus had never considered moving it because it belonged here, near the door, near the place where the world ended and the home began. The gardenias down beside the photograph. What remained of them? Petals folded and translucent, stem still green, the whole small arrangement looking like something that had been through something and was not sure yet whether it had survived. Looked at them for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen, filled a low glass with water, brought it back, and placed the stems carefully inside. One at a time. He was not a man who rushed the small rituals. The stems went into the water, and the flowers did what Eleanor had said they would do, not dramatically, not immediately, but the beginning of it. Something in the angle of the stems changed, something in the way they held themselves, the memory of what they'd been doing before everything interrupted them. He stood looking at the photograph and the book and the flowers in the low glass of water. Then he sat down. Not in his chair. He had a reading chair in the study, good leather, bought the year the company turned its first real profit. He sat on the bench along the hall wall, the simple wooden bench that had been here when he bought the house and that he had never replaced because it was good solid wood and there was no reason to replace good solid things just because you could afford to. He sat on the bench and he looked at Diane's photograph and he breathed. Outside, the street had gone quiet in the way streets go quiet after something has happened on them. The ordinary quiet of a late Wednesday night. A different quiet, the particular quality of a place that has been the site of something is now processing it the way a body processes shock, not all at once, not cleanly, but slowly, cell by cell, finding the new shape of itself. Marcus could feel it even inside, even through the walls. He breathed. And then, because he was alone, and the lamp was on, and the flowers were in the water, and Diane's photograph was 3 feet away, and it was the 3-year anniversary of the worst morning of his life, he let the memory come that he had been holding at a careful distance for the last hour and a half. The one about Ruth Webb, not about Harold or the Callaways or the boardroom or the parking garage, a different one. The oldest one, the one that lived below all the others. He was 8 years old. The kitchen smelt like whatever his mother had been cooking, which was always something, because Ruth Webb cooked the way some people pray, consistently, without requiring a special occasion, as a form of basic maintenance of the world. Come home from a long day, a very long day. Marcus knew the shape of her long days by the way she set her bag down. On a regular day, it was a placing, deliberate, chosen. On a long day, it was a setting down, the bag taking its own weight, Ruth briefly surrendering the management of it. Today was a setting down day. She came to the kitchen and she moved through it the way she always moved through it, with the economy of someone who knew every inch of it, who had organized it according to an internal logic, refined over years, who could navigate it in full darkness and often had when Marcus was small and she'd gotten up in the night to check on him. Down at the table, and then she did something she did not do often. She opened her arms and she looked at Marcus, who was 8 and technically past the age for laps, but was her son and her only one. And the question of what age you were past, these things had always struck Ruth Webb as a question raised by people who didn't understand what laps were for. Marcus climbed into her lap. She was tired. He could feel the tiredness in her arms, in the way she held him, not loosely. Nothing loose about Ruth Webb, but the specific hold of someone who is drawing energy from the contact as much as giving it. She held him and she rocked him slightly, the small rocking that was not for infants but for people of any age who needed the rhythm of it. Into the top of his head. The world will try to make you small, baby, every single day. 100 ways you'll stop noticing because they'll become the furniture, just background furniture of your whole life that you walk around without seeing anymore. Marcus listened. He was 8. He understood about half of what she said at the level of language and all of it at the level of something deeper, the place where things that matter land before you have the vocabulary to name them. Job is not to fight the furniture, she said. You'll exhaust yourself fighting furniture. Your job is to grow. To grow so thoroughly and so completely, with your whole self pointed toward what you're supposed to be, that one day you look up and the furniture can't contain you anymore. Can't, because you've become too large for it. She rocked him. You grow, baby, full and completely. The rest takes care of itself. Maybe not today, maybe not soon, but it takes care of itself. She smelled like the kitchen, and underneath that the particular scent that was simply her, the one he had known since before he could form a coherent thought and would know. He understood now at 7 until he no longer could. Fully understood at 8 what she was preparing him for. He understood now, had understood it at 19, standing on a Birmingham bus with her hand in his. 23, at 30, at 47, in all the rooms and on all the sidewalks where the furniture had made its presence known. Had understood it tonight on his own sidewalk, in front of his own gate, holding his dead wife's flowers on the anniversary of her death. Had grown so thoroughly and so completely that the furniture tonight had found it could not contain him. Found its own limitations exposed, its own insufficiency made visible, in front of 41,000 people and a 16-year-old boy with a phone, a sassy 72-year-old woman with a bad hip who had not moved from his side. Ruth Webb had died in 2007. She had lived to see him on the Forbes cover, had held the magazine in both hands and examined it for a long time, turned it slightly in the light. Set it on the kitchen table next to the salt shaker, had said, "The suit is nice, but I liked you better in your basketball shorts." Until he had to sit down. She was the funniest person he had ever known, and the most far-sighted. And the most right, in the end, about the most important things. He carried her the way you carry the people who have built the interior of you. Not as memory exactly, but as structure. As the load-bearing part of something that would otherwise not stand. Marcus sat on the hall bench with the lamp on and the flowers in water and Diane's photograph watching, and Ruth Webb's voice still in his chest where she'd placed it 62 years ago. The street continued its quiet. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. James, 38 years old. He that had cheekbones, his mother's laugh, the full-face version, nothing held back, and his own particular way of caring about things, which was completely and without embarrassment, a quality Marcus had watched him grow into through his 20s and had recognized with something larger than pride as genuinely his own. James lived in Atlanta with his wife Keisha and 2 daughters. The younger one, Maya, had recently announced her intention to become a marine biologist who also competed in gymnastics, which Marcus found entirely reasonable. The older one, Priya, 8 years old, had her grandfather's habit of saying less than she knew and watching to see what people did with the space. Marcus picked up Dad James's voice carrying the specific quality got when he was working hard to sound casual and not quite succeeding. I saw the stream. I assumed you would. 41,000 people. I was aware of some of them. Pause. Then Dad, I'm fine, James. I know you're fine. You're always fine. That I want you to know that a thing I find concerning on a regular basis. Another pause. Are you fine, or are you sitting in the hall right now looking at Mom's picture and calling it fine? Marcus looked at the bench he was sitting on, 3 feet from the photograph. Come home this weekend, he said. Silence. The silence of someone recalibrating. Yeah? I want to tell you about your grandmother, about something she said to me when I was 8 years old. Been meaning to tell you for years, and He stopped. I keep meaning to. Okay. James's voice had gone quiet in the way it went quiet when something mattered. Okay, Dad, I'll be there Friday. Bring the girls, obviously, and don't bring that coffee from the airport. It tastes like a choice someone made under duress. Laughed, and in the laugh, Marcus heard Diane, the full-face version, nothing held back. Friday, James said. Friday, Marcus said. He held the phone after they'd hung up, not looking at anything, just holding it, the warm weight of it in his hand, the conversation still settling in the air around him. Outside on Prescott Drive, number 22 had gone dark. She turned on the television for the noise. That was what she told herself. For the noise, for the company of sound in a house that was too quiet at night, in the way that houses become too quiet when the person who used to fill them is gone and you haven't figured out yet how to fill the sound yourself. Robert had been gone 6 years. She'd bought this house on Prescott Drive partly because it was a good house, and partly because she'd needed, after 6 years in the house where Robert had died, to be somewhere that didn't know him yet. She turned on the television and saw herself. The local news station had picked up Darius's stream, a segment already running, the chyron at the bottom reading Prescott Drive incident, homo blocked at a gate, and the footage playing and her face on the screen. Down on the couch and looked at herself from the outside. She watched the whole thing. She watched herself cross her arms in front of a gate that wasn't hers. She watched herself dismiss the gate system. She watched herself say, "I'm protecting this neighborhood," to a woman who had lived in the neighborhood 15 years longer. She watched herself point at a man who was holding flowers for a dead wife on the anniversary of her death and say things she had said and could not take back. She watched Olin take off his badge. She watched the woman in the dark coat speak about her father. She watched the gate open. She watched Gus Webb walk through it without hurrying and without performing anything for anyone and say, "Clearly, this street has good people on it." She watched herself in the background of that shot, standing aside, looking at the ground. The television ran the segment twice. Watched both times. Then she turned it off. The house was very quiet. She sat on the couch and she did not move for a long time. She was not the kind of woman who cried easily, had kept somewhere in her 30s into the version of herself that handled things, that kept moving. Robert had loved that about her and had also, occasionally, suggested it had a cost she wasn't always accounting for. Sat on the couch and she did not cry, but she looked at herself in the dark window across the room. Her own reflection looking back, she thought about her father, not often. Her father had been a complicated man, and she had spent her 40s making a kind of peace with it that didn't require idealize him, but they are reducing him to his failures. Been both things. Good man. Also a man with certainties he'd never examined. Also a man who had handed her things as though they were heirlooms, as though their age was proof of their worth, as though what had been given to him could simply be passed forward without inspection. She'd taken them without inspection. She was 58 years old, and she had spent this evening being absolutely certain about a man she had never spoken to, had never sexed a single question of, had never once looked at with actual curiosity rather than conclusion. Thought about what Eleanor Voss had said after Marcus went inside. Eleanor had come to stand near her, not to confront, just near, and she'd said, "You made a mistake tonight. Doesn't make you who you are forever. What you do tomorrow, that does." Gloria had not responded, had stood there and let the words arrive. What you do tomorrow. She sat in the quiet and thought about the gap between a mistake and a reckoning. The difference between being seen doing wrong and choosing to do something about it. About Robert, who had brought her flowers on their wedding day, white gardenias, 3 florists, a payphone, and said he wanted something that smelled like a promise you intended to keep. Kept her promise to Robert, imperfectly, humanly, with full commitment. This was a different kind of promise. No one to make it to. No ceremony, just herself in a quiet house at 11:30 at night, deciding what kind of person she was going to be tomorrow morning. With it until past midnight, then she went to bed. She did not sleep well, but she did, at some point in the small hours, sleep. The florist on Clement Avenue opened at 7. Gloria was there at 5 past. The woman behind the counter, older, careful hands, the ease of someone who had worked with growing things for decades, looked up when Gloria came in. "White gardenias," Gloria said. "Do you have them?" The woman looked at her for a moment. "Just came in this morning. Still fresh." She wrapped them in brown paper while Gloria stood at the counter. "They're for someone special?" the woman asked. Gloria looked at the flowers. She thought about Robert's voice in a church 31 years ago. She thought about Marcus Webb on a sidewalk holding the same flowers for 45 minutes. She thought about what it cost to carry something that long without setting it down, without performing the carrying, without demanding that anyone acknowledge the weight. I hope so, she said. I'm not sure yet. She drove to Prescott Drive, parked 3 houses down, sat in the car for 4 minutes. She got out and walked to the gate. She stood in front of it, not the way she'd stood the night before. No arms crossed, no certainty. Just a woman on a sidewalk in the early morning with flowers in her hand and no script for what came next. She pressed the intercom. "Mr. Webb is not available, I know," Gloria said. "I don't need him to come out." Set the flowers down in front of the gate on the stone edge, brown paper still neatly folded. She stood there a moment. Not for cameras. There were none, no crowd, no witnesses at 7:30 on a Thursday morning. For herself, 'cause some things you have to do in front of yourself first. Then she turned and walked back to her car. She didn't look back at the gate. But she sat in the car for another minute before she started it, aware of something she hadn't been the night before, the quality of the street around her. The oak trees that had been old before she arrived, the cracks in the sidewalk that carried the history of the ground beneath them. The sense of a place that had accumulated meaning over time, whether or not everyone walking through it knew what that history was. She had 6 months. She had a lot of learning to do. She started the car and drove home. Inside the house, Marcus saw it on the camera. He was in the kitchen with his coffee, the property feed on the small screen on the counter. He watched Gloria set the flowers down, watched her stand there, watched her walk back to her car and sit for a minute before she drove away. He stood at the counter for a moment. Then he noticed something else on the feed, the stone wall beside the gate where Olin's badge had been sitting since 11 o'clock the night before. The wall was empty. Sometime in the night, without announcement, Olin had come back for it. Marcus looked at the empty wall. At Gloria's gardenias on the step, then at the gardenias from last night in the low glass on the hall table. Standing straighter this morning, the color still full day back, the petals still showing the evidence of what they'd been through, but present and clear. He put his coffee down and went to the front. He unlatched the small side gate and walked out to the stone step and picked up Gloria's flowers. Stood with them for a moment on the sidewalk of his own street on a Thursday morning in October. No one watching. Just the oaks and the early light and the particular quality of a morning after something. He went back inside. Put Gloria's gardenias in a separate glass. Set beside the first one on the hall table, on the other side of Diane's photograph, so the picture sat between them. Back, 2 glasses of gardenias, 1 photograph, Harold's book. He thought it looked like a conversation, the kind that happens over years. The kind where the point is not the conclusion, but the continuing, the showing up, the willingness to be wrong and to bring flowers anyway. He went to the kitchen and called the florist on Clement Avenue. "I'd like to send a delivery," he said when she answered. "To the Voss residence on Prescott Drive, whatever's freshest this morning." He paused. "Leave a note that says, 'Thank you for staying.'" Swung up, went to stand at the kitchen window, looking out at the Japanese maple in the back garden. Deep red orange in the morning light, the color of something lit from inside. He thought about Friday, about James and Maya and the conversation about Ruth Webb that had been waiting to be had for years. About Theo, Olin's son, 26 years old, sitting across kitchen tables from families the system had decided to look at with suspicion first. Doing the work honestly, caring about the outcome in a way you can't switch off at the end of the shift. Thought about what it meant that a man named Olin had come back in the night and quietly taken his badge off a stone wall. No audience, no camera, just the private act of someone deciding who they were going to be going forward. He thought about Gloria standing at an intercom at 7:30 in the morning with flowers and no script. He thought about Eleanor on his side of the street for 45 minutes with a complaining hip and not a single intention of going anywhere. About Darius, 16 years old, holding a phone steady for an hour because he understood, in the wordless way that teenagers sometimes understand. Adults have trained themselves not to notice that bearing witness is one of the oldest and most necessary things a person can do. He stood at the kitchen window and looked at the maple and thought about growing, about how growing is not a thing you do and then are done with. It is a thing you do. Every morning you open a door and decide what kind of person you're going to be when you walk through it. He was 67 years old. It was still growing, and that was not a small thing. That was, in fact, the whole point. Down his coffee cup, went to his study, opened his laptop, had things to do, did them. The hall table held its arrangement behind him. 2 glasses of gardenias, 1 photograph, 1 book with dead man's handwriting in it. Stayed on the way it always stayed on. The house continued to be what it had always been. The place where Marcus Webb came home. Whether or not the world was ready to see it, he was home. He was growing. He had always been both of those things. And on a Thursday morning in October, with flowers on his table and Friday was coming, and the maple going red-orange on the back garden, and a delivery of fresh flowers on its way to a woman named Eleanor Voss, who had stood on his side of the street when it mattered. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. It is what they give you. It is what you refuse to surrender.